and thanks for being here. One of the wonderful things about doing this is you get to engage and meet people sometimes that inspire you, motivate you, and educate you all at the same time. And our guest tonight is somebody like that. He's a graduate of Cornell. He went to Cleveland Marshall Law School, and he has an interesting history already in government. Those of you, anybody here remember Mary Berry? Jeff Dean does, those of you that are seriously involved in politics, because she was head of the United States Civil Rights Commission when President Bush appointed our speaker, Peter Kirsanow, to the Civil Rights Commission, and she swore that it would take federal marshals to seat Mr. Kirsanow on the Civil Rights Commission, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court before he was finally seated on the Civil Rights Commission. He is currently still a member of the United States Civil Rights Commission, and he also has served on the United States National Labor Relations Board, and we know that's been in the news quite a bit recently. He's currently a partner with the Benesch Law Firm. He has testified before Congress on the appointment of Supreme Court justices, and he also is a fellow radio personality. He does something on WHK called the Kirsanow Moment every day on WHK, and he will be the guest on our radio show on Sunday night, this Sunday night, 9 o'clock on WHK The Avenue. Please welcome Peter Kirsanow.
Thanks very much, Doug, and thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. Doug asked me when I came here to talk about the NLRB, but it's 7:30. I don't want to put you to sleep too soon. I may touch upon it in a little while. You also asked me to talk about something else, voter registration. I can talk about all kinds of things. I'm very good at bloviating. Having practiced law for 35 years, it's what I do for a living. What I'd like to do, though, is talk about something a little bit more serious. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to go through, I'm glad the judge is here, what I'd like to do is talk about the rule of law and what's happening with our current administration, as opposed to one of the previous speakers. I do protest the president vehemently, and I urge all of you to do the same. We don't have enough of it, because what he is doing is abandoning, corrupting, and violating the rule of law on a serial and profound basis. This is the 20th anniversary to the day of when Richard M. Nixon died. Many of you were alive during the time of Watergate. Okay? Despite my incredible, vigorous, and robust appearance, I remember all of that. I've been around for a little while. What Nixon was accused of doing was violating, in essence, the rule of law. The second article of impeachment was that he endeavored to use the IRS against his political opponents. He endeavored. He tried. He wasn't successful. He wanted to do so. Nobody assisted him. How many of you have seen the testimony of Catherine Elderbright before Congress? She was a businesswoman who founded an organization, 501c3, called True the Vote. Now, this is a woman who had been in business for about 20 years in Texas. Never had been really engaged in civic involvement, in politics. And she starts something to make sure that voter integrity was assured in her district. So she founded this organization. Now, she'd been in business for 20 years. Never before had any interaction with the government. Nobody ever audited her. Nobody ever inspected her facilities. No investigations. True the Vote was a conservative organization, and was founded for a good reason. Many of you hear the mantra over and over and over again that there's no such thing as voter fraud, right? You hear it constantly. No such thing as voter fraud. I'm going on my 13th year as a member of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and our chief charge is to deal with deprivations of voting rights, among discrimination issues also. I see the data, unadulterated data. There is rampant voter fraud going on. Before I lose my place, though, I want to make a short detour. 2 weeks ago, the Board of Elections of North Carolina determined that in 2012, 35,000 plus North Carolinians with the same last name, same 4 digits of their social security number, voted in another state. Now, it's conceivable, law of averages says it's conceivable somebody with the same last name and the last 4 digits of a social security number, it may just be a coincidence. Why is that significant? That was in 2012, 35,000 double voters. And that was based on a correlation of databases with only half the states in the United States. The biggest states were not in that database, so it could have been far more than that. It's significant because 4 years before, in 2008, Barack Obama beat John McCain by only 14,000 votes. I've testified before Congress on voting rights and rampant voting fraud. It is everywhere. It's significant. And Catherine Engelbrecht wanted to forestall that, as any American would, because every fraudulent vote cancels out a real vote. Within weeks of forming her organization, she was visited for the first time ever by the FBI, twice. Then she was inspected by OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. The agent in charge said, I have absolutely no idea why I'm here. Then the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms showed up, despite the fact that her business has nothing to do with alcohol, tobacco, or firearms. Then she gets audited by the IRS. When she testified before Congress a few months ago, Democrats in Congress tried to shout her down, claim that basically she's making this up. Elijah Cummings, Democratic congressman, excoriated her. And only a week and a half ago, emails were released for the first time showing that not only was Elijah Cummings, but Sheldon Whitehouse, a senator with whom I've had dealings, instigated this oppression, this persecution of Catherine Engelbrecht. She's had to spend tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees to defend herself. Then we find out, just a week ago, that Lois Lerner, the IRS individual at the center of the controversy who pled the fifth, I understand the judge will tell you you have a constitutional right to plead the fifth, doesn't mean you're guilty. I've testified scores of times before Congress. I don't recall ever pleading the fifth. She pleads the fifth, an innocent American exercising First Amendment rights to petition the government is oppressed by this. And remember the axiom, what was the old axiom of, if a tree falls in the forest but no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? Simply because the mainstream media doesn't report about this doesn't mean it's a titanic scandal that dwarfs Watergate. But the mainstream media is not reporting on it. I'm a lawyer. I usually engage in very droll, boring, dry, sober matters. We don't engage in hyperbole a lot, at least not in my practice. But when I say these things, I'm sometimes fearful that people will think I need to be fitted with a tinfoil hat. But these are facts. This is what's actually happening in America. So today I had the privilege of being on the Bill Bennett show. He wanted to ask me about an initiative that the President and the Justice Department under Eric Holder have come up with that would grant clemency on a class basis, on a mass basis, to felony drug offenders who've been in prison. Okay? Follow me on this, because this is all consistent with respect to the complete abrogation of the rule of law. And this is serious stuff. This far transcends anything Nixon even thought about doing. What, now the President, let me see if I've got my handy-dandy Constitution here. Yes, there it is. Because I sometimes forget a little bit about it. I have a feeling the president forgets everything in here or holds it in contempt. I don't say that lightly. The president has the power to grant clemency in discrete cases. That is, he will look at a given instance, a singular instance of someone who may have been, frankly, done an injustice. Either the sentence meted out was maybe too long, maybe he didn't get a fair trial for whatever reason, and in individual cases here and there, he has the ability to say, I will pardon that individual or commute his sentence. Individual cases. What the president purports to do today is to take an entire class of offenders without looking at the individual circumstances that led to that person's conviction. Again, this is aside from whether or not you agree with drug policy, okay? This has to do with the rule of law. But he takes an entire class and says, I will grant clemency to thousands of these individuals because I disagree with the duly enacted sentencing provisions Congress has established for these drug offenses. Congress, under Article 1 of the Constitution, wrote the law. You remember your civics classes, right? 3 branches of government. You got legislative branch, executive branch, judicial branch. They all have their functions, separation of powers. And the president may not intrude upon the prerogatives of the legislative branch. First 43 presidents may not. This president not only intrudes, he tramples, stomps around, tears it up. I'm not exaggerating. I say again, simply because the media doesn't report it doesn't mean it's not a scandal of titanic proportions. And we should be appalled at what's going on. An entire class of felons, whether you agree or disagree, he does not have the authority to do it. Why is that important? Because he does this on a serial basis. It is similar to what he did with immigration, regardless of where you stand on immigration. If you think, good thing to have, grant amnesty or bad thing, that should be done through the legislative process, where the people speaking through their elected representatives in the course of debate on the Senate floor and the House floor, exchange ideas, debate propositions. It takes time. It is a very contentious process. This is a big deal. And everyone's voice deserves to be heard. You voted for those individuals. King George, President Obama, decides to grant amnesty to tens of thousands of individuals, regardless of whether or not you think that's appropriate. Only weeks before doing so, he admits to Univision, I do not have correctly. He got it right this time. I do not have the legal authority to do that. A few weeks later, because it was politically advantageous, he does it. Stroke of the pen, executive order. Again, an entire class of individuals. He has the power to possibly grant amnesty to individuals based on certain circumstances. He doesn't have the ability to rewrite the immigration laws all by himself. Again, I'm going to go to my Constitution. Do you remember the Declaration of Independence also? Remember that? It's an old document. It was put together by some dead white men, so it doesn't mean a thing. These guys didn't know a thing. Declaration of Independence. Remember King George? I've just told you about 2 of 17 documented cases where the president has completely vitiated the rule of law in a profound fashion, not a minor fashion. So I look here, and I actually believe in this stuff. I think it's important. Declaration of Independence. Barb, you remember reading this in class? Okay. Actually, there was a time when we actually read these things. We actually thought that learning about Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, remember those guys? Were almost as important as learning about Sacagawea. No disrespect to Sacagawea, but we now know more about Sacagawea when you look at your textbooks than we know about Thomas Jefferson. There's certain textbooks today don't even talk about James Madison, the author of the Constitution, at least the First Amendment. Stunning. Okay, so this is what this old document said. Declaration of Independence. Remember that guy King George? Did whatever he wanted to do, very imperiously. I'm going to quarter troops in your houses. I'm going to compel you to pay all kinds of ridiculous taxes. And the founders said this: deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its principles in such form. Don't get me wrong. I don't have a tinfoil hat on. I'm not saying we should overthrow the government. Nothing of the sort. What I'm saying is, under circumstances similar to what we're facing today, and arguably much less intrusive, our founding fathers were willing to lay down their fortunes and their lives to get rid of that form of government. I say that it's incumbent upon us to uphold those principles, not in any revolutionary fashion, but by opposing the president, who's doing things that King George would hope to do, Richard Nixon never did. Another example of the complete abrogation of the rule of law, and why these things are important. We heard about what he's doing with the IRS. We know what he's doing with immigration. A few weeks ago, the president issued an executive order. He was playing Santa Claus. The executive order was the result of a promise he made in the State of the Union address, where he said, we need to raise the minimum wage. Congress won't do it. I will do it for federal contractors, which means I am going to compel anybody who contracts with the federal government to pay their employees a minimum wage of $10.10 an hour. Where he got that figure, who knows? $10.10 an hour will be the new minimum wage for federal contractors. And he issued that executive order. I'm a labor and employment attorney. Unfortunately, I know a few things about this. I looked at it immediately. It's blatantly unconstitutional. Again, simply because the media doesn't report it doesn't mean it's not unconstitutional. It is unconstitutional, flatly so. And I'll tell you why if you'd like to be bored.
Please.
The president may not, by executive order, change the law. What Congress has written, he may not change. There is a famous case the judge knows, 1954, Supreme Court, Youngstown Sheet and Tube. Justice Jackson said that an executive order may not change the law of the land. It cannot do so. It may be consistent with the law and implement the law, but cannot act diametrically opposed thereto. Here's the problem. There are 4 separate statutes enacted by Congress that dictate how the minimum wage to federal contractors and others are supposed to be paid. Congress has made it very explicit. The Walsh-Healy Act, Davis-Bacon Act, Fair Labor Standards Act, Davis-Bacon Act. Is that 4? Davis-Bacon twice, Walsh-Healy Service Contract Act. 4. It's late. I've been up since 4:30. 4, in which they said the minimum wage is determined by the prevailing minimum for the specific industry and the specific occupation in the area. It's not a national wage applied to any occupation in any industry. And they said it 4 times. That's how important they thought it was. Your elected representative thought that was that important. And they put it down in the law. They voted on it. The president signs an executive order and is not challenged. Now, I happen to have challenged a couple of the orders of the president, and have won in D.C. Circuit Court. Not hard to do. Got to pay me a lot of money, but not hard to do. The problem is, we've gotten to a point now, and I see this, that so many people, I'm talking about major businesses and organizations, trade associations, that would normally challenge these things because it's harmful to their businesses or their interests, are scared to do so. They don't want to have a target on their backs. So they may call you up and they'll think about it, and they'll entertain the possibility, because it will cost their industries billions of dollars, possibly suppress tens of thousands of new jobs. They don't want to be the one to put themselves out there and possibly be a sacrificial lamb. Because they've seen how this administration operates. They see what they do to a capital Engelbrecht. If the stakes are higher, what will they do? Again, no tinfoil hats here. Very sober, boring guy. Just the facts, man. 1820s. Remember Alexis de Tocqueville? Remember history classes, civics classes? Come on, you're Republicans. You actually read things. Possibly the most, one of the better observers of American society and governance. And he said, the species of oppression by which democratic nations is governed is unlike anything which ever before existed in history. It does not tyrannize, but it compresses, enervates, extinguishes, and stupefies a people till each nation is nothing more than a flock of timid animals of which the government is the shepherd. That's maybe the best encapsulation 180 years ago, or 100, whatever it was, my math is not that good, of the American scene I've ever heard, prescient. He knew what was coming. He predicted that this would happen. It's not tyranny. We don't have people being shot in the streets like in Ukraine. It enervates, extinguishes, compresses, and stupefies a people till they're nothing much more than a flock of timid animals of which the government is the shepherd. Obamacare gets me to my next point. How many waivers has the president issued on what he believes to be apparently his law? It's my law.
38, 36.
Something like that.
Maybe more.
I lost count. I don't think anybody even knows anymore. He issues them on a Friday afternoon. Nobody knows. And again, the press doesn't report, the tree falls in the forest, we don't know about it. So this titanic law, purporting to reconfigure 1/6 of the society, is changed at whim and as a matter of political expediency by our imperial president. Astonishing. This is just one of the reasons why I say protest this president. Don't be cowed by the fact, it's easy for me to say, but don't be cowed by the fact that the media and so many others will immediately, reflexively call you a racist for doing so. It is the greatest dodge there is, and his supporters know it. They know that by going out and finding some sacrificial lambs and habitually and regularly calling them racists, that you'll be afraid of being called the same thing. A natural human tendency. You think of yourself as a good person. You can't plausibly think, how could they think I'm racist? I don't want anyone to think that I am, so I won't say it. And they use that as a stealth vehicle to get an agenda passed that is contrary to American ideas. This is important stuff. Because sometimes you have to wonder, we haven't been at this pass in this country, can we get this stuff back once we've lost it? Do we get it back? Once we have waived it, once, as Obama would do, once we've ceded our rights, do we ever again get the opportunity to protest this? Understand this. We've been operating in this country for a couple of hundred years, the greatest and freest greatest and freest experiment in the history of mankind, and we're not used to the possibility of tyranny or oppression. We can't conceive that would ever happen in this country. I am the son of a Russian immigrant. Black Russian, black. He escaped from the NKVD, the predecessor to the KGB. Twice, second time successful. By the way, when they tortured you, they didn't just pour water down your nose. What they typically did is insert needles in your ears, take lit cigarettes, hold up your eyes and burn your eyeballs, you know, hook up jumper cables to the genitalia, all kinds of good stuff like that. Escape from them. He understood tyranny. He understood the fragility of freedom. When you get folks who know totalitarianism, who come to the United States of America, they are the canaries in the coal mine. Talk to some of these emigres. Some of them are from Cuba, some are from the former Soviet bloc. They will tell you, guys, we have seen this movie before. Don't go down this path. They've seen it. We have never seen it. We don't think it's plausible. We think, nah, get the tinfoil hat for that guy. We are seeing the erosion of our representative democracy before our eyes. Our media is completely complicit. Completely complicit.
So Pete, isn't that why we learned about the Second Amendment?
Well, you know, you may have seen, regardless of your view of Mr. Bundy out in Nevada, as a lawyer, I happen to think you should comply with the court orders. Maybe put the amount of grazing fees in escrow or something, at least as a measure of good faith. But it was very instructive. Regardless of how you think about Mr. Cliven Bundy and his ranch and his cattle and the grazing fees out there, it is an abomination that the United States of America would send 200 troops tricked out like SEAL Team 6 to collect grazing fees. Did you see them? Snipers. They had every sort of weaponry imaginable leveled against American citizens. But what happened? I saw what happened. They were running roughshod over these American citizens. Again, I think that they may have been, or Mr. Bundy may have been in the wrong in terms of his legal rights, but when you deploy that kind of a show of force, there's something fundamentally wrong. What happened was they were running roughshod over them, and what happened? Looked like a John Wayne movie. All of a sudden, you got these guys on horses with flags and weapons. Second Amendment. Nobody can run roughshod over you. Again, you talk to Russians, they will tell you never, ever, ever, ever give up your Second Amendment rights. Never do so. Because here was a question. They backed down. They said, we're out of here. They saw some special forces, real bad guys with guns. Hey, those are the real guys. Those are guys we want to be. They backed down. Now, good thing, I'm not going to make a pronouncement on it. It's just an example of why the Second Amendment, it's there for a reason. The First Amendment, it's the first one. The First Amendment. Free speech, freedom of religion, the exercise thereof, and to petition the government. Petitioning the government means you can go to the government, ask for things, complain about things, form more associations to do that. Government can't restrain you. And there's time and place restrictions, but government can't prevent that. But we're seeing that more and more often today. And we're somewhat complacent. As Republicans, we have jobs. We are not paid to agitate. We don't have a whole lot of free time to bloviate. I do, apparently. But we have things to do. We're responsible people. Families to take care of, work to do. We don't have hours in the day to do all these things. Taxes to pay. Good point. We're now at a point where less than 50% of people are paying income tax. Well, you know, if only half the people have skin in the game, as Republicans, what do we always talk about? Cutting taxes? Game over. Because now that doesn't appeal to half of the electorate. You can say cut taxes all you want and think that's a winning electoral message, but it's going over the heads of half of the people paying no income tax. Maybe one of the worst things Republicans have ever done. Everyone should have skin in the game. I try to do calculations as to how much money I spend, how much things plausibly may I use, and the costs thereof in terms of paying taxes. I've got a lot of taxes, tons of taxes, but I hardly access any government services at all. I use the roads, I fly a lot, I like the FAA, I want to make sure they have air traffic controllers. I want to make sure the FDA inspects I take thyroid medication, make sure that's okay. don't do a whole lot else except the thing I really want them to do. Provide for the national defense. That's what the federal government's supposed to do. First thing they're supposed to do. So what's happening? We see Chuck Hagel announce that the Army is going to be reduced to the lowest level in 80 years, 420,000 troops. We see that they're going to reduce our strategic bomber fleet force by 16%, our submarine-based missiles by 36%. At a time when Al-Qaeda's on the march, we just saw them have their biggest reunion ever. I thought they were on the run, remember? On the run to have a big party at Kremlin. When Vladimir Putin is laughing, I assure you, when he gets a phone call from Biden, he puts it on mute, and all of his cohorts are laughing, slapping their knees. Another red line. Are they playing tic-tac-toe? When China is building up a massive blue water navy in the Pacific and challenging our hegemony of the Pacific. And these are just a few things that are going on throughout the world. You will not find any country in the world, not one, with whom we have a relationship that's better than it was before Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State and Barack Obama became president. Not one. They asked Hillary Clinton just last week, in every interview with her is a fawning interview. Please, Empress Clinton, tell us what was your greatest achievement as Secretary of State. Now remember, this is one of the Clintons. They have poll tested everything in the world. They have an answer for everything in the world. They're prepared for any political inquiry whatsoever. And she was unprepared to answer that question because there is no answer. She gave the Russians the reset button. Couldn't spell it correctly in Russian. She gave them a reset button, and Vladimir Putin said, I got these guys right where I want them. And then Barack Obama tells Medvedev, after the next election, I'll have more flexibility. That scared the heck out of him. What does that mean? And he whispered it to him. He thought he was off mic. He never told the American people that. More flexibility. Does that mean more flexible so he can bend over backwards to allow him to invade Ukraine? What does that mean? Don't we deserve an answer? And that's why the fourth estate, I told you about the three branches, the fourth estate, the media. We give them specific recognition under the First Amendment because we understand it's important for the functioning of our democracy, the preservation of our freedoms, that we have a watchdog. That's why they get freedom of the press clause in the First Amendment. Extraordinarily important. And they've become a propaganda arm of the presidency. If you want accountability in your government, you're going to have to vote for a Republican, because only then will the media say, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing? This president could do virtually anything it has, and the media yawns. Again, simply because they're not reporting it, simply because there's no one in that forest to hear the tree fall, doesn't mean it did not fall, and it's falling loudly. Your instincts are correct. If you think something is fundamentally wrong with what's going on, but you're a little puzzled, because why isn't the media excited about this? There was a big deal about Watergate, but they just kind of go away. Your instincts are absolutely correct. If you're a student of history, you know this. So, protest this president, as well as his policies. Because as they say in Washington, personnel is policy. Brings me to the next point. How much time do I have? I can talk forever.
As much as you want.
We can go all night.
Personnel is policy. When I was nominated by President Bush, again, Doug knows I went to the Supreme Court because they refused to seat me. I thought I was dangerous. Then, when the president nominated me for the National Labor Relations Board, Teddy Kennedy told the president, Kirsanow will never be confirmed. He's Attila the Hun. I think it has something to do with my appearance, not my demeanor. And nonetheless, he says, I will not be confirmed. Teddy Kennedy was a very smart guy. Later on, by the way, I got to form a relationship with him. He was a very genial person, completely opposed to everything the man ever did. I got a little problem with Chappaquiddick. But Teddy Kennedy understood, because all they do, the family business is politics, that people make policy. And he saw Kirsanow and the John Boltons and folks like that as extremely dangerous, because they were true believers. I don't care what people think about me. I do care about what my granddaughter thinks about me, my kids think about me, what my wife thinks about me. Beyond that, I'm more interested in the United States of America than I am what some pundit says, or some group of people lie about me. Don't care. We have a father that escaped death numerous times to get to this country. Give me a break. These things are more important. He came here for a reason, to give me opportunities that I would not otherwise have. I'm not going to squander them. So John Bolton once said, he's not a friend of mine, I just have met him and talked to him on a couple of occasions. He said, and this was very, very important, before I went to Washington, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights is a part-time position. I practice law in Cleveland. And then a couple of times a month, I fly down to Washington, and it's like recess. I go down there and get to practice, do Civil Rights Commission stuff. The National Labor Relations Board, though, was a full-time position. Went to Washington to live. That was a full-time position that required a lot more energy and greater commitment. And John Bolton said, when he first was appointed to his first position by the president, and this was President Reagan, every single day, he would walk into his office in the morning, stand behind his chair of his desk, and the first thing he did before he would sit down and address any business was to say, what would the president want me to do? He said it was important to orient himself in that respect. And I'll get to the reason for that in a minute. But he made sure that what he was doing was discharging the wishes of Ronald Reagan. Not because he worshiped Ronald Reagan. What he worshiped was his Constitution. And he understood that the president had been elected by the people, which meant the people were telling him what he was supposed to do any given day. Why is it important to orient himself? Because I had a staff of 25 lawyers at the National Labor Relations Board that helped me. National Labor Relations Board is the Supreme Court of Labor and Employment, okay? It's like being in the Court of Appeals, and you write decisions as to various aspects of labor and employment. Pretty powerful. Of the 25 attorneys, who were all great and phenomenal people, loved them all, 24 were decidedly liberal. One was in the middle. The permanent government in Washington, who really control things, because they're there regardless of changes of administration, regardless of the elections, the people who are there all the time, who run the agencies, who control the levers of government, are way left. 90% or more. I've been there, I've seen it. A lot of them are great people, like my staff, love them to death. But that's why it's important to orient yourself, because when we were deciding cases, I would sit with my chief counsel, deputy chief counsel, and a couple of the other attorneys, and we discussed the case. And if I hadn't oriented myself that morning like John Bolton did, it's easy, regardless of how well anchored you may be, to drift in that direction. Personnel is policy. Personnel is policy, and look at who Barack Obama has appointed. Eric Holder has been held in contempt of Congress. We have an attorney general, the chief law enforcement official in the entire land, held in contempt, legal contempt. It's astonishing. They can, and then he had, by the way, as an aside, he then had the temerity of going to the great and noble Al Sharpton's organization and complaining and saying, can you imagine any other attorney general, any president being treated the way he was? I guess he missed the treatment of all those Republican attorneys general, even some Democratic ones. Janet Reno was treated worse than he was. Eric Holder, as a member of the Civil Rights Commission, we conducted definitely the first investigation of the Obama administration had to do with the dismissal of a court case against the new Black Panther Party dealing with voter intimidation. The case had been won. They'd already won it. We conducted an investigation. We brought in all these individuals to testify in front of us. It's part of our charge. There's a statute that requires the Justice Department, mandates that they cooperate with our investigations. This was right at the outset of the Obama administration. We were the canary in the coal mine this time, because everything they did presaged what's been going on over the last 5 years. We got stoned. We got lied to. By lied to, we currently have a Secretary of Labor, Thomas Perez, who at that time was the head of civil rights for the Department of Justice, the person in charge of the department that dismissed the new Black Panther lawsuit. We asked a lot of questions. I asked a question of him, asking whether or not certain high-level individuals, political appointees, were involved in that dismissal. He said no. I'll fast forward and make this very brief. It was determined in federal court that he was, I'll put it euphemistically, untruthful. That bothered me a little bit. He raised his hand before the Civil Rights Commission, swore to tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth. And then he said something that was untruthful. It was a big deal, because we found out from emails that the top levels of the White House were involved in the dismissal of that lawsuit. Because of that, I went last year when he was nominated to be Secretary of Labor, a cabinet-level individual. And because I'm a federal official, a weird one, but a federal official, I get to go talk to senators in Congress. Hello, Senator Sessions, can I talk to you? Yeah, come on in. So I went to talk to a number of senators who were responsible for confirming. And I remember, by the way, as an aside, one of the best senators around in terms of competency and seriousness. He may not agree with all of his positions, is Senator Tom Coburn. Just one of the senators I talked to. He's got the greatest staff around. They are smarter than anyone you can imagine. I've gone to a lot of other staffs and talked to them, and they're good people, smart people. Senator Sessions has very good people too. But Coburn's people would have more knowledge about the subject matter of what I wanted to talk about than I did. They were prepared. They knew their stuff inside out. They had recommendations for me. So I talked to these individuals and told them, these senators, and said, look, here's our story with respect to Thomas Perez. He got confirmed anyway. You may think it's a minor matter, but he is putting forth one of the most radical labor agendas in history. An agenda that may be great for his political party and those who believe as he does, but is demonstrably deleterious to workers and business. We are going on 5.5 years of the worst economy we've had since the Great Depression. I know it's Bush's fault. But we have more people unemployed now than we did at the outset of the financial crisis. How many more? 8.4 million have fewer jobs right now. Fewer jobs right now. The unemployment rate is purportedly what now? 6.7%? You know that's false. Everyone knows it's false. I'm a labor lawyer. I study these things. I get the data constantly. Part of it is not so much the Obama administration, but the ridiculous way we measure unemployment. If you stop looking for a job, you're no longer unemployed. So they don't measure it. If the unemployment rate were measured today, the same way that it was at the outset of the Obama administration, the unemployment rate would be 10.3%. And that's because the labor force participation rate has dropped. That is, People are just not participating in labor. They're not even looking for jobs anymore. They've given up. Why? Part of the reason is all of the policies the Obama administration is implementing destroys jobs. Again, Republicans, you went to school, you read about these things, you create jobs, you run businesses, you know how these things work. Jobs don't flourish full flower when you raise the minimum wage. It destroys jobs. We know that. They say it will alleviate poverty. We've been raising the minimum wage for 60 years now. It's time to still have poverty. If it works, how can it disappear? We raise the minimum wage all the time. If the minimum wage being raised to $10.10 an hour is a good thing, let's raise it to $20 an hour. $100 an hour, everybody's rich. What do you mean? Why not? Why not? Why not do that? Makes sense, right? For every 10% increase in the minimum wage, there's a correlation. When you look at this, it's almost inviolate. That for every 10% increase in the minimum wage, there's a 15% decrease in the employment rate of young black Americans. If the Republican Party had guts, it would be saying this constantly. Mr. President, you are destroying the prospects of young black Americans. Remember Trayvon Martin? If I had a son, he'd look like me, remember? Yeah. All those people who look like you, Mr. President, are without jobs. No hope of getting jobs, and it's because of your policies. Stand up and say that. Don't be afraid of being called. I know it's easier for me to say than it is for you, but this is your country. We have to say that. The rule of law. Again, regardless of where you stand on particular issues, the president has a duty, again under this ridiculous document, to take care, to faithfully execute the laws. So Congress passed a law called the Defense of Marriage Act. You may disagree or agree with it. For a long time, up until he became enlightened, our own president agreed with it. He was a bigot before that. But Attorney General Holder instructed his staff not to enforce that law. Don't enforce it. When I get elected in 2016 as president, what I'm going to do is instruct my Attorney General. You know that thing they passed in 1916 or 17? I think it's called the Internal Revenue Code. He's granted how many waivers? 38? April 15th, waiver. We're going to delay that deadline. He's delayed all the other deadlines. Let's delay that one. Why can't I? If you can delay the individual mandate, the employer mandate, a host of mandates under Obamacare, pushing it back sometimes 3 years, despite the fact that the law says explicitly it will go into effect January 1, 2014, why can't you delay the April 15th filing deadline? Or how about quarterly payers? Some of us have to pay quarterly. I don't want to pay on January 15th. I don't have my act together by then. I'm just recovering from New Year's. I'm still hungover. Let's delay that one too. This is why these things are important, because once you permit the violation of the rule of law, there are no limiting principles. Like I was making a little funny with respect to the minimum wage. Let's raise it up to $100, but what's your limiting principle? Where do you stop? Once you cede that, there's no stopping. And if the press will not act as a responsible watchdog, and the American people have, Catherine Engelbrecht did. She had a lot of guts to get up there before Congress, knowing she had FBI, ATF, OSHA, IRS, all gunning for her. And that Texan got up there and gave him the what for. Remember the Bowery Boys giving him the what for? I was cheering when I watched that on YouTube. I know my father would be cheering if he were alive. That's what Americans do. This is our country. doesn't belong to Barack Obama. Apparently he didn't get it. Remember, Barb, when you and I were in civics class, we learned certain things in 4th and 5th grade about this great country. In 4th and 5th grade, Mr. Obama was in Indonesia. I'm not one of these conspiracy theorists or birthers or anything like that. The point I was making is the founders had it almost right when they said you have to be a natural-born citizen to be a president of the United States. And the reason for that is, one of the reasons is they wanted you to be someone who understood the country. Again, not a birther, nothing like that. He deserves to be president, he's constitutionally authorized to be president, but he, during his formative years, was growing up in Indonesia. I don't know what they were learning back then. I'm not sure he was learning about the Declaration of Independence. I'm not sure he was learning about the Civil War or all those other things. I don't know if he was. But there's something about his approach to governance that is different from the approach that's been taken by presidents, Republican and Democrat, throughout our history. And it's a bad approach. It's a demonstrably bad approach. How do we know that? Because we still have horrendous unemployment. We still have a stagnant economy. We still have huge problems overseas. He was going to fix all these things. The oceans were going to fall. The planet was going to heal itself. We were going to be respected overseas. It's not transpiring. This is important stuff because our kids and us, remember how they always say, well, we're leaving this bad legacy for our kids. I like my kids a lot, but heck with them. This is bad for us right now. It's happening now. And I say, and again, I've been going on and on and on. I apologize for that. I wanted to make certain discrete points about the violation of the rule of law, the abrogation thereof. He's doing it in profound ways. There's a whole laundry list of even more instances in which he's doing so. And it's not just him all by himself. He has a lot of individuals who are assisting him in doing so. The press is enabling him. And what a lot of radio talk show hosts refer to as low information voters enable that also. We're not low information. We have no excuse for sitting on our hands and not doing anything about it. Voting is just the basic responsibility we have. It's just the least of the responsibilities. That's a given. It's perfunctory. You should be doing that. But more than that, you should be giving people the what for on a regular basis. Call up people who are doing the wrong thing, email them, write them letters, and say, better get with the program. The program is the Constitution of the United States of America. And you better not act in derogation thereof. And do it on a regular basis. We've got an opportunity in November to do it again. Things look good. Frankly, I never underestimate the ability of the National Republican Party to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. So it's up to every single one of us, to give them the what for. Every single time, give them the what for. As Doug said, I have an opportunity on radio to give them the what for on a regular basis. And I know they love me down in Washington because I will give you an example of why I know somebody's paying attention. As a member of the Civil Rights Commission, we issue several reports, but there's one statutory report, which is our major report every year that goes to Congress and the President. It's usually our most important, it is our most important report. In this particular report, we trashed certain things that the administration was doing, which is unusual for the Civil Rights Commission. The report is always signed by the chairman of the Civil Rights Commission. I'm not the chairman. It's signed by the chairman. There are 8 members of the Civil Rights Commission. A couple of weeks later, I receive a letter and a fax. It's addressed to me and me alone as a member of the Civil Rights Commission. I looked at it. It's from President Barack Obama. To little old me. What is this about? He took umbrage at the report and the findings of the report that were negative for him. I thought about it and I said, why is he saying it? My name's not even on the report. But he sent it to me for a reason, I guess. Maybe he thinks I'm the one who's giving everybody the what for. That got me a little nervous, but I will tell you, and I'll conclude with this. I got a little nervous. This guy's got drones at his command. He's got I see him zapping people all over the place. And then I circle back to If my father could escape from the NKVD, German Shepherd dogs, walk across nearly 100 miles of frozen landscape to get to freedom, get to the United States, work as a steel worker, provide me with an education at an Ivy League university, least I could do is give the president a wetful. Thanks very much. I'll take any questions you may have.
What can we do?
Oh, there's a lot of things we can do.
Well, I'm just saying,
First
there's
of all,
a few of us
yeah.
that write letters to the editor, and when we even do get published, they'll put 3 other opposing ones
Yeah.
to what we've written and make us sound like fools.
Here's what I've seen. Give you an example, and I know a lot of you have done this. I was living in Washington at the time the first immigration battle of recent years came up in 2006 and 2007. You may remember that. John McCain and Ted Kennedy, along with President Bush, were purporting to grant amnesty and all kinds of other things with respect to immigration reform. I was in the halls of Congress at the time this was proposed, and it was extraordinary. You could walk down the halls of various Senate office buildings and hear the phones ringing like crazy. People were outraged. And as soon as that proposal saw the light of day, about a week later, the Senate turned around completely, did a 180 and said, oh, never mind, we're not going to do that. And they said afterwards that it was the greatest response they ever had to any proposed piece of legislation. People were vehemently opposed to it. When I go see congressmen, and some of you have also, down in Washington, here's what I see. I walk into the foyer of their office, and there's usually 2 young staffers there. One of them is the scheduler, one's a person who's sitting at a desk taking phone calls. And I watch what they do, because usually I gotta sit there and wait for 10, 15 minutes. And I like watching what they're doing. And one of them will be answering the phone, and they'll have a little ledger or checklist there. And they'll get a phone from Mr. Jones from, you know, who knows, Oklahoma City, if I'm going to see Tom Coburn. Oh yes, Mr. Jones, Senator Coburn is opposed to that piece of legislation. I will let him know you're also opposed to it. And actually start to put it down. This actually gets their attention. They take this down seriously, and they actually look at the end of the day to see how many of these calls have we got. That's important. They also check emails to a lesser extent. Letters are also important. They catalog those. But the thing, when you make a personal, when you touch them, either in person, you can go down there if you want. I know it's tough to take time out of your day or go to their local office. But when you touch them either by voice or in person, it gets their attention more than an email or a letter. I know it from personal experience. Yes?
I don't have as much of a question as I do a critique of the legal profession, which I think is causing much of the problems that we are experiencing, and I think it exacerbates what we view as the problem. When you write a law that's 2,700 pages long, it only invites the cockroaches to come out and make money off of it.
Yeah.
The judge left before I could ask her how she feels about the activist judges that are also compounding the problems that you see happening. And it creates an entire citizenry who thinks, A, they're smarter than us, as in the president's case. I'm smarter than everybody else. I'm just going to do this, and then we leave it up to the judges to decide. Right. In court cases brought by yourself and others in the legal profession, you have a Supreme Court justice who have to do backbends to label it a tax to go through the system. I hope he never gets a nice night of sleep ever again in his life. My point being is that the legal profession has made it an almost daunting task to change anything. Yeah. And with the citizenry that lives in Washington, all because their pocketbooks are tied to it.
Yeah,
you know,
I agree with
again,
you.
that's why it's so difficult to change. You could vote for Lou Bartulovic one day. I won't be able to get much done because that system that's there is part of the problem.
Yeah,
and that's almost a secondary problem that you could vote for whoever. But the fact of the matter is, it's a daunting task. And again, I'm not a defeatist, but that's part of the problem that we feel
You're not going to change it overnight. No way, but every action is important. And I agree with you entirely. I also teach law school in my spare time. Remember what they talked about in terms of the march through the institutions? Marxism marching through the institutions. The left has done so. They completely own lock, stock, and barrel the academy. K through 12 education, the colleges, and law schools. When I teach my law school class, I look at the students' faces and it looks like somebody threw ice water at them when they hear what I have to say. They've never heard this kind of stuff before. That's because the left owns it. The lawyers come out thinking like leftists. And you said, today, this is a great one. Today the Supreme Court came out with an important case called Schuette versus Bam. I won't go into all the legalities of it, but they overturned what our circuit, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals did. And what the Sixth Circuit did is this. The Sixth Circuit said, I am not making this up. They say, you can look it up. The Sixth Circuit said that when voters enact a provision that prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, that's racial discrimination. I am not making that up. I am not making it up. To the Supreme Court's credit, they overturned that. Now, I would have been a little bit more acerbic in my writing. How can you really have to check yourself. For example, you could know nuclear physics, calculus, quantum mechanics, but when you put 2 plus 2 down and it comes out 9, maybe you better see where you went off the tracks there. But the Sixth Circuit didn't. But that's the problem. But don't be daunted by that. Because just as incrementally they can move things leftward, incrementally, it doesn't happen overnight, we can move things rightward. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, you were.
So, I come from the USSR, and this whole concept of affirmative action is completely strange. It's year 2014. Do we still need affirmative action? I mean, how many? So I'm Jewish, and my people have been persecuted for a lot longer than people on the left claim to have persecution of the blacks in this country. So what?
Yeah.
I mean, do we still need shreds of this affirmative action? I mean, professionally, I ran into black people that have to justify their credentials because there's suspicions running around and they didn't get there on their merits.
Yeah, and you cited all the reasons for it. And one of the reasons why they wanted federal marshals needed to seat me to be on the Civil Rights Commission is because I'm probably one of the principal proponents in the country for your viewpoint. The 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed 50 years ago. 50 years ago. You can no longer discriminate on the basis of race. Okay? Now, you could, maybe 50 years ago, make a plausible case. I might even entertain it to say, look, because of the baleful history related to race in this country over hundreds of years, maybe for a short period of time, maybe you'd have a little advantage. Maybe you could have made that case. I wouldn't agree with it, but at least you'd have a more reasonable and plausible argument than you have today. Here's what actually happens in practice. Let's say, for a moment, by the way, John Roberts, again, I testified in his favor in his confirmation hearing, and then the Obamacare case came out, and I said, what the heck happened? John Roberts said something very good in the Seattle school district case. His line was, the best way to stop discriminating on the basis of race is stop discriminating on the basis of race. Okay? That's what we should be doing in this country. But even if you don't believe in that proposition, here's what confounds the left whenever they face me in debates. By the way, I debate maybe once a month at various law schools around the country. I encourage you to come and hear me speak, because I never lose. It's not because, no, it's not because I'm a great debater. It's because the law, facts, and logical argument are on our side when it comes to this. And here's what confounds the other side every time when this issue is being debated. They will say, well, blacks and Hispanics, they've been discriminated against, and boy, we need some preferences to kind of level the playing field. Even if you agree with that flawed proposition, even if you agree with it, here's what the facts are. When the University of Michigan case came out, Supreme Court case came out in 2003, that validated the use of racial preferences in college admissions. At that time, they said that the law school program was lawful because the way they did it was they didn't assign a raw point total like the undergraduate program. Follow me on this for just a moment, because this is kind of interesting. The undergraduate Michigan program assigned a point value to each application of students based on race. Right? They evaluated your application based on a lot of factors: SAT score, your GPA, your extracurricular activities, sports, what region of the country you came from even. And they assigned a point value to it. With the undergraduate program, which was held in lawful by the Supreme Court, is assign a point value on the basis of race. That did this. It gave you 20 points on a 200-point scale. You had a maximum of 200 points. If you were black, you got an extra 20 points. That 20 points was the functional equivalent of twice the value of a perfect SAT score. Okay?
Wow.
Michigan said they were just putting a little thumb on the scale. It was just a little marginal thing. Twice the value. Supreme Court, to its credit, said that is unlawful. That's a rigid quota. That's unlawful. And they had a law school program, which did it a little bit differently. In the law school, what they did is they said race was one of many factors, but it was not the predominant factor. In fact, it was a minor factor, mere thumb on the scale, a feather on the scale in the admissions process. All things being equal, equal SATs, equal GPAs, extracurriculars, it was just a little feather on the scale. That was permissible. All right. Let me ask you this question. If Cleveland State awarded black, all other things being equal, 2 people apply to Cleveland State Law School. One black, one white, same GPAs, same SATs, same extracurriculars. Do you think that it would be lawful for the school to award to the black applicant an extra 10 points on a 200-point scale? Anybody? How about 20 points? 30 points? 40 points? I ask this question in my debates of the law students around me. They're always hostile when I come in. They really are. They can't stand me. They know who I am. They're opposed to me. When I went out to USC, the person who invited me before I came out there said, "Whoa, you've got a hot LZ here. They're going to have a big protest." They didn't have a protest. I was very disappointed. But when they did, but when I showed up, they had T-shirts made out with my picture on it with a circle and an X. Well, when I came in, they were all opposed to me. At the end of the debate, I'm not going to say I changed minds, but a number of the black students came up to me and said, "We never heard this before. We didn't realize this." They were embarrassed. They didn't realize. Here's what the thing is. The advantage given by University of Michigan Law School when they said it was a mere feather on the scale was not 10 points. It was not 20 points. It was not 30 points. Not 100 points. When the Michigan Law School case was decided, the advantage to black applicants and to a lesser extent Hispanic applicants was 17,400%. Beyond a minimal level of qualification, it virtually guaranteed admission. That's not a feather on the scale, that's an anvil. Under any formulation of affirmative action, however you feel about what has happened in race in this country, that is wrong. And if it's litigated again, because they didn't deduce that at trial, that didn't come out at trial because, I don't want to get to the legalities, the guys against affirmative action who were phenomenal attorneys, I know who they were, thought, hey, how can we lose this? So they simply went based on the law, and the court disappointed them. Next time it comes up, they'll lose and lose big time, because this is wrong. But here's the problem. I'm sorry for meandering around your question, but did you know that blacks and Hispanics who are admitted either at law school or universities pursuant to affirmative action, at law schools, those admitted pursuant to affirmative action are 6 times more likely fail the bar exam than those not admitted pursuant to affirmative action. 50% of all black law students admitted pursuant to affirmative action are in the bottom 10% of their class. They are 4 times more likely to drop out because they can't compete. Here's the best evidence of why affirmative action, regardless, if you don't believe in principles of equal treatment, screw the principles. How do I get mine? Even if you don't believe in the principle of equal treatment, you'd be opposed to affirmative action because we'll never be able to get into colleges in California anymore. You can't pass this. It passed, and guess what happened? Those people were actually right. As soon as Prop 209 passed, the admissions rates for blacks and Hispanics at the elite California schools plummeted. Then an interesting thing happened. The admissions rates for blacks and Hispanics at the 2nd tier and 3rd tier schools skyrocketed. But then even something more important happened. More black and Hispanic law students were graduating, getting degrees, and becoming productive members of society after Prop 209 than before. Why? Because before Prop 209, black and Hispanic students who had come from horrible backgrounds and schools with poor educations were given affirmative action and were competing against students that had gone to elite schools and were well prepared. They were mismatched. It's the mismatch theory. I live near Collinwood High School in Cleveland. My kids would never go there. They went to Catholic school up the street, very fine school. You can't take a student from Collinwood High School, all due respect to Collinwood, who gets a horrendous education, isn't taught anything at home, sprinkle that magic fairy dust of affirmative action on him and tell him to go compete at Harvard against a kid who came from Hawken or Orange or any of these other places. Doesn't work. He will not be able to compete. However, if you take that kid from Collinwood, maybe he goes to Cleveland State, fine school, he can compete against that caliber of competition. He stays in school because he doesn't get discouraged. He gets a degree, gets a job, becomes a contributing member of society, and doesn't nurse grievances about how society done him wrong. I have challenged, I was at the University of Chicago Law School debating a couple of times. They invite me back just about every year, maybe for entertainment value, I think. But I debate at the, and this tears my heart out, the Barack Obama Auditorium. So I kept my lunch down and I debate. First of all, most of the students there, as I said before, at every other place, they're always hostile to me. They don't know any of these facts. When they hear these facts, they're reasonable. They get it. They get it right away. But nobody knows these facts. Go out there and tell people these things. Tell people common sense things. Things that are common sense. These students, regardless of where they go, I know I'm taking way too much time. I need to get going too. These students are operating at a deficit from the very beginning. Because you know what? When you hold certain factors equal, black students, Hispanic students, white students, doesn't matter. By the way, Asian students are discriminated against in affirmative action worse than white students are. But when you hold certain factors level, it doesn't matter if they're black, white, doesn't matter. They'll perform at virtually the same level. Do you know what the most important factor is? Almost any differences. This is actually the case. Talk to Bill Bennett, former Secretary of Education, he gave you the data on this. I get the state Civil Rights Commission. When you hold this one factor level, that is, if you take a black kid and a white kid, Hispanic kid and Asian kid, everything else being the same, that is, come from the same income level, all the other things, the single most important factor for success is coming from a two-parent family.
That's right. That's right.
Single most important factor. If that's the same, hardly any differences. Now there are a few here and there. There always going to be. I like to say that there is no test that does not discriminate. All right? Discriminates against dumb people. Okay? But you hold that back and say, here's the problem. Here is the problem. Right now, 2014 in the United States of America, 73% of all black kids are born to a single mom. 73. Game over. I don't want to be harsh, but those kids don't have a chance. Some will. We want to help them. But game over. And yet we have an administration that's perpetuating the things that make it easy to be a single parent. We shouldn't be doing that. By the way, in 1964, Daniel Patrick Moynihan issued a report, it was very famous, in which he talked about the plight, the real baneful fact of single parenthood, and said, this is bad news, we've got to do something about it. He was excoriated by the left, and he's a man of the left. He was excoriated. Racist. Oh my goodness, you can't say this stuff. At that time, the single parenthood rate in the black community was only 20%. And he was saying this is a huge problem. Right now, the single parenthood rate in the white community is 30%. That should scare the heck out of you. We are not doing things because we're scared. We don't want to be judgmental. We don't, look, I'm not trying to be judgmental. But it is a big judgment that you are taking certain actions that are bad for your kids, because I don't want to raise your kids. I don't want to pay for the raising your kids. I'm a nice guy, but I don't want to do it. You're not raising your kids. No one's paying for that. I'm paying for that. I've raised my own kids. But you're not doing your kids any favors if you decide not to marry the other parent. And this administration, not just this administration, but legions of administrations have implemented policies that take away all the disincentives to single parenthood. It's easier to be a single parenthood in certain circumstances than it is to be a parent. It's never easier, but in terms of finances, if you don't make that commitment, it's easier. It's ridiculous. Did you know? Look, I got all this data, great data. You're armed with this data now. Go forth. Here's one other data point. A single mother of 2 kids can access welfare benefits, whether it's TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, housing benefits, you name it. All the benefits that are available. You don't have to go scurrying around, by the way. You want to see some of the smartest people in the world? Look for somebody on welfare who's trying to seek benefits. That person is a rocket scientist. The total benefits, how much do you think they are?
A single person making 14 to 18,000 with 3 kids, automatically gets $6,000 to $8,000 refund checks every year.
Right. The total amount of benefits available for a single mother with 2 kids, if she accesses all of them, $64,000.
Tax-free?
They're tax welfare. Now, that's $64,000 a year. Now I'm not really good at math, but I'm a labor lawyer, so I'm supposed to know this stuff off the top of my head.
It's more than minimum wage.
That's $30 an hour. You work 2,080 hours full-time a year, right?
Right.
That's $30 an hour. And you don't have to set the alarm clock, get out of bed, get the kids ready for school, get on the bus, go deal with a horrendous boss, all the trials and tribulations of the day, come back home, cook dinner. Don't have to do all that. Collect your check.
Kids how to do for the next generation.
You watch Oprah. Nice existence. Life is good. We're creating massive disincentives for gainful employment. You'd have to be, let's face it, to a certain extent, you'd have to be an idiot to find a job under those circumstances. And I say that because most of us, because we're responsible, would say, I don't want to limit myself to $64,000 anyway. And also, I don't want to be living off the government. That's not the way we're raised. But if you know your options are limited, you have a poor education, you know that the odds of you ever finding a job that's going to make $64,000 a year are nil. What are you going to do?
I talked to you at the Senate Coalition meeting some time ago. You did a good analysis of the Obamacare lawsuits, 4, 5, 6 of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you give an update on
Sure,
that?
real fast.
Question number 1. Question number 2 is when are we going to see your name on the ballot?
Well, never going to happen.
Yeah.
No, not going to happen. I just want to give people what for. Obamacare. If you got 16 hours, I am one of maybe 3 people in the entire United States that actually read the whole bill. I read it in 2010 when it was passed. My assistant read it also. I charged her with reading it. I know a little bit about it. Let me just tell you a few of the things about you know all the bad things about Obamacare. I could go over it over and over. Everything the president says about it, false, lie. If it comes out of his mouth, it is false. All right? 8 million people signed up? Right. Here, by the way, before I get into the origination clause argument that you asked me about, let me just tell you about that 8 million figure that he cites. Few facts. First of all, the reason Obamacare was passed is because we supposedly had 47 million uninsured. 47 million. Now, you may agree or disagree with that, but it was a lot of people, but let's say it was 40 million. 40 million uninsured. We got to pass Obamacare because it's a sin for the greatest country in the world to have 40 million uninsured. So, he upsets the apple cart of our healthcare industry, the greatest one in the world for all of its flaws, costs $1.7 trillion to date, and he supposedly has insured 8 million out of the 47 million. That's all. Even the CBO says, the Congressional Budget Office estimate says, 10 years from now, we're still going to have 31 million uninsured. 30. Fail. Right there. Game over. It doesn't work. The purported reason for its passage is false. Did not work. End of story. But let's take 8 million as a great success. Here's what we know. We know that they won't tell us how many people actually pay their first premium. Too complicated. Don't understand. Messed up website. The state of Georgia has a website for their exchange. You know this. Only 50% of the people who signed up in Georgia pay their first premium. Maybe more signed up on the federal exchange or pay their first premium. But if it's anywhere near 50%, that's already reduced it to 4 million. Now remember, the purpose of Obamacare is to insure those who previously did not have insurance. So how many newly insured are there? Newly insured. Well, we know that 6.2 million had their policies canceled. Isn't it more likely that those who had insurance before, thought it important enough to have insurance, were the ones who then signed up after having their insurance canceled? Probably. So that reduces it even more. Then here's the other thing. So now we've still got 47 million people who haven't been insured after $1.7 trillion. Let's say 2 million were insured. 2 million were insured. You could give each one of those 2 million $1 million if it cost $1.7 trillion. $1 million. Go home. Rich, you won the lottery. Or you could have just distributed checks for $1.7 trillion to the 47 million and they could have gotten their own insurance. And don't have to bother the rest of us. This is a major failure. Why are you standing for this? Get your pitchforks out. Go down to Washington. Tar and feather these clowns. This is a huge failure. Aside from the policy issue and the reduction of our freedoms, restrictions on religious liberties, all the other things, our premiums are going up. I'm a labor lawyer. I see this all the time. We predicted this 4 years ago. Average amount of cost per employee is $4,800 to comply with Obamacare. It costs every average employer $4,800 more to employ an individual under Obamacare now. What does that mean? I'm not going to hire, or I don't have enough money to make a new product or engage in R&D. This is horrendous. This is the biggest mammoth failure in history. And the media's like, oh, well, you know, he said he signed up 8 million. We believe him this time. Despite he said we can keep our health insurance if we like it. We keep our doctor. Wrong. The networks are narrowed now. You get fewer doctors. I represent a lot of physicians groups. They are apoplectic about this. Smart people. I was thinking about becoming a doctor at one time. I realized my limitations. I ran into organic chem. Any doctors here? Organic chemists? Forget it. The best and brightest of us are not going to go into the medical profession. Why would you? You are now going to be an hourly employee of some hospital. That's what happens. Deductibles. You may have had a deductible of $1,500, and now you see a deductible of $6,000 and $12,000. You're self-insuring. This is a deal? Are you angry yet? You should be. Okay, going to your question. We know that John Roberts had a giant brain fart back in 2012 when he decided that somehow through some legal alchemy, Obamacare is a tax, despite the fact that you can go back to the video and see every Democrat who's anybody, Nancy Pelosi, the big brain, Harry Reid, Barack Obama, saying this is not a tax. It is not a tax, because they knew that was poison. This is not a tax, it's not a tax, it's not a tax, it's not a tax. John Roberts somehow found out it was a tax. And remember how this happened. When the Supreme Court was deliberating upon this, originally, all the reports, and I tend to believe these, say Roberts had initially cast his vote against Obamacare, and at the last minute decided to change his mind. He comes up with this convoluted thing that's a tax. He's much smarter than I am. Again, I testified in his favor at his confirmation hearing. I read all of his Court of Appeals decisions. Big mind. Went off the rails. Well, we thought game over. Supreme Court has pronounced Obamacare constitutional. It's here. You hear Obama say it's the law of the land, it's the law of the land, despite the fact I keep changing the law of the land. Debate over, debate over. No more debates. Here's the thing, it's not over, because the most effective challenge to Obamacare you haven't heard about is the Halbig versus Sebelius case, currently winding its way very quietly and slowly through the federal courts. It's now at the DC Court of Appeals, the second most important court in the world.
Jonathan Adler came and spoke to us about it.
Jonathan Adler, you heard, smart guy, much smarter than me. He's the guy who came up with the theory for this. He may be the person who saves the country. Jonathan Adler. And here's the problem. Okay? There are two different cases, two different types of cases that I talked about last time.
Where are the judges there?
This is why Harry Reid wanted to lower the, right. They have now, and I've argued before the DC Circuit twice in the last year and a half. And of course I've won. So I'm brilliant, as you can tell. We don't know who the panel is going to be ultimately. If it goes on bank, which means the full court, the Democrats will have an advantage. But this is going to be a tough one for them. All right? This will be very, very tough. Even if you want to have a desired outcome, you have to twist yourself into a ridiculous pretzel to get to this point. This is going to be a very good challenge. I'm not predicting a win here, but there are two different ones. The first one is Jonathan Adler's case. And in that one, throughout Obamacare, and again, I read it, strewn throughout it, it says that the employer mandate, the subsidies that an individual gets from signing up for Obamacare, the financing mechanism, this thing, in other words, implodes completely if this doesn't operate. That is, individuals who sign up for Obamacare don't get subsidies, the financing mechanism doesn't work, Obamacare crashes and burns. That's unarguable. That will happen. Those subsidies, however, are only available to individuals that sign up on the state exchanges. It says that, at bare minimum, and others have done more counting on this than I have, 35 times throughout the statute. It's clear, unequivocal. 36 states have refused to create their own exchanges. Only 2/3 of the states don't have state exchanges. So if that's the case, that means no subsidies for them, Obamacare crashes. That's been decided. The second case is the origination clause case. I'm not going to pull out the Constitution too many times, but in the Constitution it says revenue measures, that is bills for spending and taxing, must originate in the House of Representatives. It says there in the Constitution. It's a pretty important document. You remember all of the political legerdemain that was going on when Obamacare was going to be enacted. we had all this ridiculous stuff going on. Votes being traded, bribes, remember the Cornhusker kickback, the Louisiana Purchase, all this stupid stuff. Then Scott Brown gets elected in Massachusetts. Remember, we thought we had 60 votes to stop it, or I'm sorry, 40 votes to stop it, all that stuff. Then they found out, Democrats came up with this very interesting way of trying to get Obamacare passed. What they did is they took a House bill. I don't remember what it was about, I used to remember, but they took a House bill. Let's say the House bill was about, you know, shrimping in Louisiana, whatever it might be. They took that bill and completely stripped all of the language out of it. Every single word out of it, with the exception of the number of the bill. And they uploaded Obamacare into it. Okay? So that they could say it originated in the House. It never did. It originated in the Senate. Now think about this. If you could, as the Senate, simply take any number of a House bill, strip out all the language, just upload our bill into it, the Senate's bill into it, you could completely circumvent the origination clause. Render it a complete nullity. That's what the Democrats did. Nancy Pelosi and the whole crew. Harry Reid, whole crew. Those two challenges, I think the second challenge, the origination clause challenge, nobody knows how that's going to come out. Okay, if I were on the court, I'd clearly say, it's ridiculous. It's like, you know, saying, well, you know, racial discrimination, prohibiting racial discrimination is unlawful. No. This is pretty clear, but a lot of legal scholars who've looked at this a little bit more closely than I have, because I've got a full-time job, say unclear about origination clause, but the Howbig versus Sebelius, John F. Nadler's case, very, very, very good chance. The Democrats are sweating on that. Okay, time to go. Thanks very much, everybody.